right. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's 30-minute webinar. My name is Mike, and I am your host. I've been a systems engineer with Variphy for about a year and a half now. I am joined today by Victor Verba. He's also a systems engineer with Variphy. Today, he'll be presenting an overview of quality metrics. Okay. Forward. Here is today's agenda. We'll get started with an overview of our company and what we do. Then we'll jump into a demo where Vic will give an in-depth presentation on quality metrics. After that, we'll take a break for some Q&A. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the Q&A panel in the bottom right in the screen. That's not their standard chat panel. There should be a separate Q&A panel in the bottom right corner. And after Q&A, we'll go ahead and reward one lucky attendee with a $50 Amazon gift card. So make sure you hang around to the end to see if you've won. Quick overview of Variphy. We are the preferred analytics and management solution for Cisco collaboration. We provide industry-leading CDR reporting, call analytics, customizable dashboards, UCCX real-time wallboard reporting and analytics, remote phone control, macros and broadcast, change management, as-built reporting, DN, DID, and dial plan management. We have a few different solutions available, but today we're going to focus on the CDR reporting and call analytics, especially the with a focus on concealment for today. So before we get started, Variphy now offers Ninja Enhanced Consulting Services, or NECS. What is NECS? Well, it's when one of our system engineers, like Vic or myself, will engage remotely, like on a one-on-one basis, to provide additional consulting services. We can be in reporting, dashboard configuration, system monitoring. What this does is it provides a dedicated service engineer to you. We'll do all the heavy lifting. If someone needs a report, they can contact us, and we'll create the report for them. If you want any additional information, please let one of us know or speak with your account manager, and we'd be more than happy to go over our consulting services more in depth. With that said, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I'm going to pass the ball to Vic. Let's dig into quality metrics.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Let me stop sharing.
And here we go.
All right, slowly. Here we go.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Hey, everybody. I want to thank you guys for attending today. The purpose of today's session is to give everybody a quick overview of call quality and how Variphy can help define call quality, as well as how you can build some reports, build some dashboards and widgets to help determine, hey, are we having a quality issue? Maybe there's certain phones that have quality issues. So what we're going to jump in today is a little bit of how to build those reports and how to build a couple of widgets or a dashboard focused strictly on the quality of calls. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and jump over to is our call reporting section. You'll notice I have a couple reports down here called Concealment Ratios. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about Cisco metrics for call quality. Now, one of the biggest things that I hear, and I hear quite often, is a lot of customers will come and say, hey, can you report MOS scores? We need to be able to see the MOS scores. So I want to kind of address that first. And because one of the things that people are used to hearing and used to seeing when they've been in the telecom world for a long time is that the MOS score, that's what's utilized to determine call quality. So I'm going to address that elephant in the room first, because the MOS scores are no longer a valid metric for reporting call quality. So here's the thing with MOS scores. Way back when Cisco, as well as other phones, not just Cisco, were developing quality metrics, those were really all based on a singular codec. And it was like the 711 codec, all right, which is a low bandwidth codec. And the way MOS scores were developed, literally, were by having people in rooms listening to calls and rating the quality of the call. So it was, a finite set of rules, quiet rooms, certain distance from the headset, certain volume, and they would rate these calls. Okay, they would give it a call quality of 1 for bad, and 5 being, a top-notch call quality. There's no interference whatsoever. So 1, there's room for interpretation. But 2, The problem was at the time they were all using the 711 codec. Again, a low band codec. The problem is since then there are a lot of different codecs out there that use various compression rates. Wideband codecs like a 722, a 29, or Opus, and of course some narrowband ones like the 711 that was created. So when we talk about that, what does that mean? Well, that means you're going to get a different quality score based on the codec that is used. So codecs are MOS scores are extremely dependent on that codec. So to give you an example of what I mean, a quality MOS score is a 5. So it goes 5 being very satisfied, great call quality, 1 being, terrible, I can't hear what's going on. So to give you an idea of what I mean, this is an example of MOS scores based on various codecs. So these scores and these MOS scores are all for the same call, all right? But if I look at the 711, I can see here I got a MOS score of 4.1. That's an excellent score. There's barely any quality depreciation in that call. However, if I look at something like a 729 that gets encoded 3 different times, the MOS score for that is actually 2.68, which is a very poor quality call. However, these are all the same quality call. So by focusing on MOS scores, you lose the ability to say average call quality. I lose the ability to report on, hey, I want to see all of my bad calls, because a bad call is interpreted by the MOS score, which is also dependent on the codec. So unless you were going to run a report based on individual codecs and individual scores, and nobody wants to do that, MOS scores are not an effective way to be able to report on call quality. So I wanted to kind of address that first, because that quality metric is not viable in today's world, and you're going to see some of that when we run reports. So to address this, what Cisco did is they brought in concealment ratios. And that's a little bit of what we're going to focus in on today. So with IP conversion, concealment ratios are much more rated based on the percentage of concealment needed. So with IP phones, you have a lot of different traffic and metrics that can go into determining what a bad call is or a good call is. But what is concealed is what I like to call is mystery data or future data. So what happens when a call gets concealed? So there's something called general concealment, and that basically means that a call is extremely audible. Maybe there's some background noise, but most of the time it's just general concealment and you don't know it. What actually happens or takes place in the background is that audio gets filled in. So to the end user, general concealment is not even really known. They don't really hear that. But then there's also severe concealment. Severe concealment is when there actually is some distortion to the call. That is when there is a lot of concealment or mystery data being plugged in a very short amount of time. So what I mean by very short amount of time is the metric for severe concealment is a large amount of concealment having to take place within 5% of a second. And it's counted down by milliseconds. So there's like 1,000 milliseconds in 1 second. And if there's 50 levels of concealment going on within 1 second, that is considered severe concealment and it shouldn't take place. And I know that's all very, very confusing, and it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that, within this 50 milliseconds of 1 second, there's all these moving parts taking place. But that's exactly what's happening. And those moving parts are filling in parts of the voice conversation. They're almost predictively filling in, the gaps, for lack of a better word. Okay, so think of it like make-believe audio. But what it's doing is it's actually taking the live audio and just filling in gaps at the millisecond level. Okay, so with that, what we're going to do today is we're going to focus in on the concealment metrics rather than the MOS scores, because again, this is not accurate. If I have multiple different compression methods, and you will, running a report for a MOS score of say 2 is going to show that this was a bad call, when in actuality, this was a very good call. It just depends on the compression method that was being used or the codec being used. All right, so enough of my rant about MOS scores, but I wanted to make sure everybody understood that, because one of the big things we hear is MOS scores. I need to be able to see my MOS scores. Those are no longer pertinent in this world because of IP, because of codecs and things like that, and concealment ratios are much more prevalent. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it, and we're going to build some reports. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to give this guy a name. We'll call it Concealment Report. We'll call it Concealment Sample, because I think I have a concealment report. All right. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to focus in on some duration. I don't necessarily want to see every call, or maybe I do want to see every call. That's completely up to you. But what I'm going to do for the purpose of this is I'm going to focus on calls that were really over 3 minutes, and then we're going to take a look at some of the concealment ratios, show how to build a report for good concealment, bad concealment, and then turn that into a widget. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and just create a search, and we'll say calls over 3 minutes. I'm going to pick a duration here. And I'm not focusing on inbound calls, outbound calls. I'm really just focusing on calls over a certain duration, but I'm also going to focus in on just my phone devices. I'm not necessarily looking at my device gateways. In this case, I'm looking at my phones. But you'll see in a second if we report this on the originating and terminating device, so we could see which devices have bad or not so great concealment ratios. We basically just want to get the gateways out of there and strictly stick to the phones. So we'll say greater than 180 seconds. All right. And the next thing we're going to do, like I said, we're going to focus in on just our phones. So I'm going to put originating and terminating device in here. And add that. And I'm going to say starts with SEP to capture my hard phones. And I'm going to say starts with IPC, capture my soft phones, and so on. You get the idea for your various devices. Maybe you've got some Jabber devices with different names. You could go ahead and get those in there as well. All right. So I'm going to match all this criteria, so that way I'm only bringing back calls over 3 minutes, and I'm only bringing back calls that start from these devices. All right. Pretty straightforward. We built our filter. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run this. But we want to get some concealment information in here. Now you'll notice we have a minimum cumulative concealment ratio. We have a minimum interval concealment ratio, minimum concealment time, and minimum severe concealment time. And that was something that I was talking about. There's concealment time, and then there's severe concealment time. Severe concealment time being where call for a certain amount of time is very difficult to understand, breaking up. You can't understand the other end user. Where minimum concealment time just means that there was some disturbance. Maybe it got noticed, maybe it didn't get noticed. That's where that mystery audio comes in, or that make-believe audio. It fills in the gaps in the conversation in such a fast amount that it is unnoticeable. But for this one, what we're going to go ahead and focus in on is the cumulative concealment ratio. Now, cumulative concealment ratio is basically the ratio of all concealment over the call versus the duration of the call. So in other words, if I had a 3-minute call and my overall concealment, both good and bad, by good, I mean got filled in, and bad, which means it was inaudible, is over a certain percent, we're going to go ahead and report that. And that's really what we want to see. We want to see when we're having that lengthy type of concealment. And that was the other part about MOS scores that made it somewhat irrelevant, is the longer the call, the less relevant the actual MOS score was, because it didn't go down to this ratio type percentage. But so let's go ahead, and I'm going to put in a value here of we'll put in 1%. So I'm going to say minimum concealment ratio is 1%, which is really good. I mean, if you're thinking about concealment on a call, if I'm on a 2-hour call and 1% of that call had some audio skip, that's not a big deal. All right. So we're going to put that in just so we can see some values. The next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and do some grouping. So not only do I want to know how often this is happening, which I'm going to go ahead and see with my total call count, average call counts, and things like that, but I also want to know the phones that it is happening to. So for this, I'm going to pick my device name also, and I'll choose my originating and terminating device name. There we go. So now that's going to go ahead and give us the devices that are actually having this concealment. All right, and we've got some basic summary in here. You can choose whether you want all this information or not. But the next thing and the important part of what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we need to add our quality information. I'm going to go ahead and add everything in here, but we'll probably come back and take some things out. So there's my concealment time. I have my interval concealment. I've got my MOS scores, my packet loss, things like that all in there. So we're going to go ahead and let's see. Here we go. Let me move this guy up. And we're going to save this guy and give him a run. So now what we're going to see is a pretty lengthy report. Hopefully not too lengthy. The thing is, you don't want concealment at all, but it's going to happen. In IP, there is concealment. But what the nice thing is there is severe concealment, and then there is just regular concealment. Regular concealment is A-OK. There's no major problem with that because Cisco is filling in the gaps. So let's go ahead and do this guy, and I'm going to run this guy back for some dates in July, and we're going to give it a whirl. So now what we're going to do is it's going to pop up a report. It's going to tell us how many calls meet our search criteria. That's over 3 minutes in SIP SCP or IPC phones, but also what meets our concealment ratio. All right, so you can see I don't have a ton of calls here, 25 calls. That is a good thing. You don't want a ton of calls in here because if there is zero concealment, that means that you are not having a particular issue. And we're going to circle back to that because it's a great way to be able to create a widget that maybe spans out daily and says, hey, this is how many calls took place with X amount of concealment each day of the week. And then you can see that. Now, if you're in the middle of the day and you start to see a spike in that, well, it gives you reason to pause and say, okay, what the heck is going on with our network? All right. So now what we're looking at is here is our search criteria. We have 25 calls. Here are all of our calls. All right. If I click on any of these guys, it's going to bring me right down into the detail. We're going to take a look at some of the detail here. So here are our concealment times. Here are our MOS scores. Like I said, Cisco decided they didn't want to use MOS scores anymore. So at one point in time, they actually just kind of took them out with SIP devices. So if you're trying to report MOS scores, again, you may get a lot of NAs because Cisco has not been reporting those. Now, my understanding is in version 12.5, they did bring back MOS scores because people were just demanding to be able to have that information. But I wouldn't use it if I were you, personal opinion. So let's take a look at our concealment time. So we have concealment time in seconds, and we have an originating and terminating. So we are tracking these at the phones, so I can see that is my originating extension right there. And that is the overall concealment time of this call. And you know what, did I add duration into this report here? Yep, total duration. So out of 8 minutes and 5 seconds, I had 139 seconds of concealment. Okay, not too bad. And my cumulative concealment ratio is about 3%. Okay, again, not too bad. My severe concealment is 71%. So, if you do the math, what was that, 60 times 8, 487 seconds of call, 139 of those. So about a little over 2 minutes had just regular concealment, and about a minute or so had severe concealment, so really bad audio. So now what we have here is this ratio of 3% that's telling me, hey, maybe not the best call quality. So now what we can do is we can start to build filters on that. Now, if this were a MOS type score, then I would have to do something like I would also have to add codecs. And this will actually be a pretty good example of what I mean by different codecs producing different concealment ratios. Because what you're going to see here are all of the different codecs that are going to be taking place in an environment. Now, this is just a sample lab with a very small subset of data. But keep in mind, in a system with 1,000, 2,000 plus phones, those codecs are going to range. And if I look through my data here, I have some using a 711. I've got some using a 729. Now, if I were looking at MOS scores for these, this could be the same exact quality call, but I'm going to get two different MOS scores. Again, one of the reasons we don't use them in Cisco or quality reporting. But so now what I'm seeing is I'm seeing some calls. We'll get back to the thing, back on track here. I have my cumulative concealment ratio. So I said about 1%. Okay, 1% of the call is not bad. But what is bad is probably about 7%. A good call from Cisco's perspective, acceptable, is between 20 and 30%. Anything over 30%, Cisco say, hey, that is a very, very bad call. And by very bad call, we mean overall concealment. In other words, not just a little bit here or there, because that concealment ratio or that cumulative concealment ratio is a ratio of all concealment versus the duration, what it's going to do is, regardless of the length of call, it's going to tell you the percentage of the time that you have had problems. So if I have, for example, a voicemail that lasts all of 30 seconds, and I have a concealment ratio of, let's say, 30%. That's not good. That means that about 20 seconds of my 1 minute call was not good or inaudible. Now, if that's a voicemail, well, I just missed a half of somebody's phone number or maybe half of their email address. But same thing goes if the call is 2 hours. If I have 30% concealment on a 2 hour call, that's just as bad is having 30% concealment on a 1 minute call. And that's why concealment ratios are important, is because they are overall quality of the call, not just individual. Now, if I wanted to run something based on concealment time or severe concealment time, I could absolutely do that. I could come in and say, where severe concealment time is over 35 seconds. You could do that. But why? 35 seconds of what is what's important. And I could build out different filters and say anything between, 1 minute and 5 minutes, where I have over, 30 seconds or 60 seconds of concealment, and I could report that individually. That's very easy to do. You can just come in, go to your report, set the durations to be between whatever values you're looking for, and set your concealment time in seconds or your severe concealment time in seconds. And you could build out different filters for different purposes, but there's no reason to do that because you have this ratio of concealment time. So let's go ahead and we're going to change this a little bit. So now we have a very acceptable concealment level. So I'm going to change this, and we're going to say this is going to be, I don't know, we'll say 20%. And we're going to run this guy, and we're going to see what we get. I don't know if I'm going to have anything, but we're going to try. So I'm going to expand my time frames a little bit here just to get a little bit more data. And we'll say previous quarter. And we'll say current quarter. Let's see if we have anything that has concealment of over 20%. Now what we're doing is we're digging into that. We're saying, okay, well, let's see if we have any really bad things going on. And we do have some over 20%. So I can see out of the previous quarter, I had 82 calls. These are all the phones having those calls. Now, nice thing about this is very quickly I can identify potential problems. Now, this is over a whole quarter. You're going to see different things. I'm working in a lab data. I have minimal data. But now the nice thing is I very easily identified the ones with the most concealment. And if you have a lot, I can absolutely change this to show just the top 10 in concealment as well. And that's just a matter of going into the report, edit my sample, and under my grouping section, I could say top 10, and then I want to sort those by, we'll say, highest to lowest. And now if I rerun this guy, now I'm only going to go ahead and show the phones with the top 10 phones with the most concealment in my organization. So again, a lot of different ways that you can build this. That's one way to be able to do that. And that metric right there, or that example right there, is what we'll use to build into a widget, because now you're going to be able to see that type of information very quickly off a dashboard or a widget. And there we go. Here's our concealment. We can see that our cumulative concealment ratio here, we're hitting our 3%, 1%. Let's see here. And seconds. go. Hold on a second. Take a look at that report. I did that wrong. There we go. I was wondering why we had some low values in there. Current quarter, we'll rerun that guy and see if we have anything over 2%. Or 20% in this case. Next thing we're going to do very quickly is we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how to build a widget off of the same information. Luckily, I don't have a lot of those. You don't want a lot of those. But you can see right here, cumulative concealment ratio is about 36%. Not a very good quality call. The severe concealment time was 176 seconds out of, do the math, and you've got your 400 or some odd seconds there. All right. So now, next thing we're going to do is we're going to build a widget off of this. So I'm going to go back, change the report just so we have a little bit more data. And I know we are running low on time, so I'll kind of jump through the rest of the sections here. And I'm going to change this back to 0.01 just so we can get some data on a widget because I don't have a lot over that 20% mark. And I'm going to pop over to dashboards and widgets. So for this one, there's a lot of different widget types you can create. Maybe in this particular one, I just want to get a basic summary of how many times this is happening. So I'm going to choose a call statistics widget. I'm going to choose my cluster. And from here, we'll just call this, bad calls. Bad calls. No. There you go. See, somebody already had something in there. And I just want a total count. I just want to know how often this is taking place. Now, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel and try to add all my criteria again. I already have that. It's built into a report. So when you're doing concealment ratios and you're doing call quality, you have to build the report first and then choose an existing report. So here I'm going to choose my concealment sample. I'm going to set for, we'll say, previous quarter, current quarter, and give this guy a run. And this is going to give me just a count of the number of calls that had a concealment ratio exceeding what I expected or what I had in there. Now, that's one way to be able to do that. Now, I have this widget. It's great. It's got my stats. I can easily copy this. And now I want to be able to create a running widget. I want to be able to see throughout the day, week, month, is my concealment or the number of calls that have severe concealment going up or going down. So for this one, and I'll call daily. And we're going to keep the same thing. I'm most interested in the total count of calls happening. It already has my search set. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the type of widget. And I'm going to do a call period. So now what I want is I want a day of week breakdown. Maybe this is a weekly report. And I want to see each day of the week, am I going up with a potential problem? Or maybe I want this broken down by the day. So in other words, each day or date, the first, the second, the third, fourth, I'm going to be able to see a running graph of how many calls I have that are not bad. Now, I'm running this for the current quarter because this is a widget. It is not going to take static dates. I can't put in, July 1st through July 2nd because that would be redundant. It's always going to show the same information. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and we'll do previous 2 months and see what we get here. Let's see. I'm going to move this guy down because it's probably going to have, there we go, a lot of days on it. And as you can see here, again, I'm in a lab system, so I have some breaks, I have some good days, I have some bad days. The nice thing about this is your graph should remain relatively static. And if I'm sitting here and today's the 31st and I'm looking at my graph and all of a sudden I see it spike when normally it's around the 4, 5, 6 range, I know I have a potential problem for the day and maybe something's going on with my network. All right. So I want to thank everybody for their time today. I know there is a lot you can do. There's a lot of different ways to be able to report quality, and I spent a lot of time talking about MOS scores because that is honestly one of the biggest things I hear is people asking for those MOS scores. And it's hard to explain. Those are no longer relevant, and this is the reason why. So now everybody understands the reason why. MOS scores not the ideal thing to use for trying to report quality because that will fluctuate depending on the codec being used. Concealment ratios are a much better way to be able to report quality information, drive reports, schedule reports, and things like that. So again, with that, I want to thank everybody for their time today. And Mike, back to you, buddy.
Excellent. Great job, Vic. Let me take the ball back. All right. I'm back to sharing my screen. We'll go ahead. And next up is Q&A. Let me pull up the Q&A. We had a couple questions come through. Vic, first question is, you didn't focus on packet loss, but is that an option to report quality also?
It is, yes, absolutely. So we do have the option to be able to show, as you saw in that report, I did include packet loss. You can also filter down the packet loss. But here's the thing about packet loss. It's giving you information about lost data going over your network, which is great. But also keep in mind what we talked about in the beginning, which was that concealment. Concealment is the idea that Cisco is filling in the missing audio. So you may have packet loss, but that doesn't necessarily mean your audio degraded. It just depends on how often that is taking place, and that's where that severe concealment comes in. So yes, we can absolutely report packet loss, and regardless of what anybody says, high packet loss is not good. But it doesn't necessarily mean bad concealment or in audio in all cases. So that's, again, why I prefer to use the concealment ratio even over packet loss.
Perfect.
But definitely packet loss has its purposes as well. If you're dropping packets, it's not a good thing.
Okay, and a couple questions that I think we already discussed, but just to kind of recap, what does it mean when the quality detail values are NA?
NA means that we did not receive anything from Cisco for that particular call, something that you will see a lot with MOS scores because, like I said, they decided they didn't want to send MOS scores. Or you'll notice in that report that I had shown, they had calls that were received and calls that were placed. In other words, originating and terminating. Now, if they originated on an extension, we're going to see that concealment information. We're going to see that quality information, but we're not going to see that quality information from, say, my cell phone. So you'll have an NA in there on the terminating part because if somebody called me, I'm the terminating end user, and you don't have my cell phone packet information or quality information. So NA just means we did not receive anything from the call manager.
All right, excellent, excellent. And the other final QA question was just about creating a widget, which you already did. So I think we're all set, unless anybody else has any other Q&A questions. If you do have any questions or you think of anything after the webinar, feel free to contact us at support@variphy.com. or you can reach out to your account manager. Next up, we will get to the winner of the Amazon gift card. The winner of today's gift card is Amber Patton. Congratulations, Amber. We'll have your manager reach out to you soon. I want to thank everyone for attending today. We do live webinars every Wednesday. Our next webinar is on September 16th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Vic and I will go over DID management in Variphy 12.2, where we'll walk through the new DID management features that are included in the new release. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all. Bye.